Let me suggest, before we get started here today, that any of you who have observations to make about the configuration of the conference, I wish we could have had more breakout sessions. We could have had time for far more input from a lot of you people. We learned a long time ago, however, in defense of the fact that we have not had a lot of general plenary sessions with people getting on their feet in the midst of all of these general meetings, that it can really be non-productive. They've said, you know, for years that a camel is a horse designed by a committee. And I say facetiously with tongue-in-cheek, and I don't want the women to assault me for saying this, that the reason God made a man first was because he really didn't want any advice on how to do that. Now, please forgive me, but you have to admit that there is a point there. He did make, anyway, all right. But we've heard it all. You know, too many cooks spoil the broth. That does not mean we don't want input. It just means that we must have decency and order, and we don't need to turn these otherwise very enjoyable and I hope rewarding and meaningful sessions into hodgepodges of disputes and words flying back and forth of all kinds of polarity and so on and so on, which we have gotten into in years in the past, and it's a very unhealthy situation and a very unenjoyable one. I end up at the end of these ministerial councils in past years, I remember, ministerial conferences rather, like a limp dish rag, you know, like I'd been run over in the street or something like that. Back in the days when my father held forth at the ministerial conferences, it was far different than the one you had this year. For one thing, you would never have had husband and wife teams up here or a lady up here talking to people from a podium and explaining things about the conduct of local churches and youth programs and things of that nature. It just wouldn't have been allowed. Women wouldn't have even been present except in some of the sessions where the wives were welcome, but the bulk of the time the wives weren't even in those sessions. And Tom Justice goes back a long way, I know, and was in a lot of them, as was I. Certainly Ron Dart was in a lot of them. So please let us hear from you. Charlie Gross, Ron Dart, any of the ministerial council members that are here, or put it down on paper. If you have suggestions on how to improve what we've been doing here for these last couple, 3 days, things that you would like to see done, please let us know about it. I don't want to stand here today and just preach a sermon on prophecy. That's not my intent. What I do want to do is to go over the basic parameters of prophecy in the light of where we are right now today and where we will be perhaps 3 to 5 or 7 or 9 years from now in the work of the church and as it affects all of us in the ministry, all of us as husbands and fathers and grandfathers, and what we probably will be seeing taking place in the world around us in the next few years. All of you probably have been watching a little bit of television from time to time, but not much since you've been here. If you even caught a little bit of CNN yesterday, you know that over this weekend while we've been here, over 20 cities in Germany have erupted in riots and demonstrations by skinheads and neo-Nazis in conflict with the police and other people on the refugee question. They are screaming, and I've written about this for a long time, Auslanders aus, and they're talking about the poor neighbor to the east being devoured by big, vibrant West Germany and all the economic problems that have come along as a result of that, and joblessness and poverty and so on. And they very deeply resent a large influx of people from the Balkan states, especially Yugoslavia. They deeply resent Poles. They deeply resent people from Turkey, from Vietnam. And a few months ago, I think in this year, a Vietnamese was, I think it was in Bremen, I've forgotten where it was. But anyways, one city in Germany was kicked to death, beaten to death, and his inert body thrown out of a public conveyance, streetcar or a bus, onto the street below and left to lie there. The old signs are there. Nazism is alive and well. It beats in the hearts of millions of Germans today. It is finding heady advancement and agreement in the minds and hearts of millions upon millions of young Germans under 30 years of age. And there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of them who do not believe there ever was a Holocaust, who have been subjected to a battery of literature that is freely available on the bookstore shelves all over Germany by revisionists and the same kinds of people who operate out of not La Jolla, but La Costa, California, that I can show you a glittering list of publications, including beautifully done, jacketed, full-color, hardback books written by former Wehrmacht officers, by members of the German military, by German historians, and by other people who are debunking the Holocaust. They say that that was deliberately done by the American army that dressed up a lot of emaciated people and put them in those rags and photographed them. And there are millions of people who believe that. And there are millions of people, survivalists, conspiracy theorists, American Nazis in the United States who believe that. Many people in the United States believe there was never a Holocaust and will argue with you about the 6 million figure that may or may not be quite accurate, but let me tell you, it's close. So we're seeing that happen. I got a letter chastising me the other day saying that this couple had come to one of my campaigns and heard me begin, as I have done many campaigns, with the statement, the CIA did not know, the FBI did not know, etc. And I've written that. I go through this litany of people that didn't know, and then I say, but we did know. And I remind them that for all of these years, all of the evangelists were trumpeting about the impending Soviet advance into the Middle East, that the communist Russian army, the Red Army, and the Soviet Union was the beast of biblical prophecy, and that they were going to come in and, of course, bring about the Great Tribulation, the Battle of Armageddon. And while they were saying that, my father before me and all of us, the pioneer students and the original gang of preachers that held sway back in 1953, 4, or 5, when I was still in Ambassador College before I graduated, were all preaching that Germany is going to rise again, and the United States of Europe is going to be the enemy that will cause the destruction of the United States of America. Now, there are people out here in the Church of God International, there are some of you in this room that may not believe 100% as I do with regard to the scenario, the overview of biblical prophecy. Let me just tell you, I will be one of the most astounded human beings you've ever known if I find another 10 years from now that somehow the Soviet Union reemerges as some gigantic power and Germany is some little nation of no consequence and some 10-nation union does not occur in Central Europe, in the heartland of where the Germanic kingdom of the Habsburgs and Bismarck and all the way down to Adolf Hitler, the Holy Roman Empire of the Middle Ages, always held sway. I will be one of the most astounded people in the world if I find out that the beast power is Saddam Hussein. I may even be put away in a funny farm. If that happens, I will be so astounded. It will blow me so out of the saddle that I won't know how to apologize for my entire lifetime of saying that what I believe is a United States of Europe is going to emerge, Germany is going to reunify. How many times have I said in the last 14 years since the CGI came into existence, the last chapter of European history has not been written? I've said it over and over and over again. We had a situation there for 44 solid years that we lived in. It was a status quo that we accepted, and every single day there was the great, huge yellow blob on the map that was the Soviet Union, and here was beleaguered West Germany, and here was a divided city, Berlin. I had to travel that way. You had to go to Frankfurt am Main, and you had to transfer. We only had 3 air corridors. You had to travel then into Tempelhof, and you actually had to be very careful in the approach patterns because we knew we were flying over communist East Germany, deep into the heart of East Germany, to get to Berlin, to land there, to visit Berlin back in the 50s and the 60s when I went there so many times. And it was a traumatic experience to go there, this divided city, to go to the wall and to go to see Checkpoint Charlie. So you can imagine what it was like to go there and to see Checkpoint Charlie disappearing and the wall coming down and my 2 sons sitting atop it. I helped tear down that wall. Now, I didn't get many big chips out of it. I got 1 chunk or 2 on my desk. It's about that big. And Ron's got some in his ashtray, little bits. But we went down and got us some tools, you know, chisel and hammer, and my sons and I were chiseling away at the wall. I wasn't surprised. I don't think most of God's people were surprised. I don't understand Joe Tkach, and the Worldwide Church of God. I do not understand what they think they're doing. I can't understand why they would not have vindicated my father's lifelong ministry and the dozens of articles that I immediately began to research and from which I took just the tip of the iceberg of 54 quotations about all that we had said so consistently, going back to one article that even was culled out of some of my bound volumes of the Plain Truth. See, I have every copy of the Plain Truth from 1934 to 1978. I don't have every copy since then, and most of them aren't worth having from that time on. I have a few that have been sent to the office, but I have bound copies from about 78 to 34, every one of them. I can go back and count the exact number of articles that I wrote during that period of time. So the consistency of that message, that German reunification, German dominance of Europe, a United States of Europe, is going to emerge as a giant superpower which will be the beast of biblical prophecy. That's what I believe. That's what I think I see happening. It's what I'm going to continually be saying. Now, all of you can stand up and give sermons on prophecy. You can explain to people that a third of the Bible is prophecy, and prophecy is history written in advance. It's the outline of God's plan as He knew it would work out according to human nature, together with those interventions of God that are necessary from time to time. You're all familiar with Daniel 2 and 4 and 7 and 11 and 12. You're familiar with some of the minor prophets. You're familiar with what Hosea says, I'm sure, about Ephraim, and familiar perhaps with a great deal of the book of Revelation and how they all fit together. I think any one of you ministers in this room could easily go back and preach from Matthew 24, Revelation 6 and 7, and show who are the four horsemen of the apocalypse in very easy to be understood, step-by-step exposition in the Scriptures. I hope you could do so. I hope that all of you can go right through the 11th chapter of the book of Daniel that I want to refer to briefly and expound it and explain it to God's people the way I believe it certainly is going to come to pass. Now, what I want to do today is just chat with you a little bit about some hypothetical scenarios that might bring to pass some of the most important prophecies in the Word of God. And I believe that there are two prophecies we want to take a look at. We can just refer briefly to Matthew 24 and Luke 21, where Jesus said, when you shall see the abomination of desolation stand in the holy place where it ought not, then know that the destruction thereof is nigh. And it says, then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. And it also says in Luke, when you see, so it's a two-part warning, Jerusalem surrounded with armies. Now, having that in our mind, in the 11th chapter of the book of Daniel, in verse 40, at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him. I do not know who that man is yet. I don't know if he is a Saudi Arabian. He used to be the Ptolemies, a lesser line of pharaohs of Egypt. And Rawlinson's Five Great Empires and Rawlinson's history details that, and I have a detailed outline of verse by verse from the histories, not only Rawlinson's but other sources, of the entire explanation historically from the commentaries and biblical history books about the 11th chapter of Daniel so far as its first fulfillment is concerned. But now when we get to verse 40, we're dealing not with Ptolemy Soter of Egypt and Antiochus Epiphanes and the wars that waged back and forth across Palestine. Antiochus, who I think was a type of Adolf Hitler, because you see this man who comes in a time of peace, enters peaceably, and gains the kingdom by flattery and so on. And the last individual that is mentioned following Heliodorus, who is a tax collector, and the Hohenzollern family meant tax collector, the Hohenzollern family from whom Kaiser Wilhelm, who was a cousin of the British royal family, came. I think that there is a shadowy sort of a repetition here of events that is going to occur. I said time and again, I phrase it this way, that it's like we are living in a time of the bizarre repetition of the same events the world went through in the World War II period, just prior to World War II. And I think we're getting close to about 1934 or 5. If you go back and look at what was happening in Germany at that time, you see that the world economy had collapsed. We have not yet come out of the Great Depression. and that when America collapsed, it took all the rest of the Western world down with it, and that because of this poverty, there were communists and anarchists and right-wingers and social democrats and socialists and all kinds of people of every political persuasion. And in those days, the laws had not been passed, especially in Europe, even though they had been in this country, that prevented the raising and the funding and the arming of a private militia. If you study Hitler's rise to power, you know that Hitler, originally with his brown shirts and so on, and Mussolini with his brown shirts, and the fascists could find other wealthy industrialists and people who agreed with them emotionally and politically, and who were willing to fund a private army. So the communists would have their little private army. It's like what you see happening, in a sense, in Sarajevo and Yugoslavia today with the Serbs, the Croats, and Bosnian, Herzegovina people fighting against the Muslims. And I hope all of you understand how to explain that to someone who might not understand it, that in the days of the Ottoman Turks, they actually advanced all the way to the gates of Vienna, and of course, as they then retreated there, they left all of these peoples pretty much divided up in pockets of religious and ethnic groups that oftentimes were almost impossible to separate totally from each other. You all know that Budapest is not one city. It used to be Buda and Pest, and it's on each side of the river, and eventually was put together into one city. You know, the Yugoslavia is a whole collection of different states of people, including what used to be a part of Alexander's kingdom, the kingdom of Macedonia. And you also know that Albania is one of the most backward nations in all of Europe. The capital is Tirana, and it is what? Islamic. It is a Muslim state. And right to the north, its neighbor is also Islamic. What is Turkey? It is Islamic. How will the Turks view an Islamic government moving into Macedonia? How will the Greeks look? Greeks being Greek Orthodox, having giant problems on Cyprus and giant problems in European Turkey, right of the Bosporus Dardanelles, having had limited little wars into which the big powers, including Britain, have had to intrude from time to time. How will the Turks respond? What do you think their leadership says about the people in Sarajevo? They want to see an Islamic government there. How do the Greeks feel about it? So you see what I'm saying? You get just a little bit of the tip of the iceberg of history, and you understand the way these governments are going to react, and you look at what is happening in that part of Europe, and then you're able to put the pieces together to see probably where it's going to go. Now, these privately funded militias in Germany were literally fighting with one another in the streets, and it wasn't just brickbats, it was oftentimes guns. You go back and read Scherer's Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, and there are some great big picture books. I've got one about that big with all the Nazi memorabilia in it and so on to show exactly how that came to pass. We're seeing it begin, believe me, now. I do not believe a nice, sedate, happy, wonderful, gradual, cooperative movement is going to come from Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, what used to be Yugoslavia, and, of course, Germany at its helm in the confines of the old Roman Empire. I do not believe it will just simply grow out of what was the common market, and before that Euromart, or the European Coal and Steel Community, or Euratom. I believe it is going to first come apart at the seams as a result of a global economic recession that will become a Great Depression and impoverish the American people and impoverish virtually the German people. I think the newfound prosperity of Japan and Germany is going to be lost temporarily. And the only reason you're going to find people giving their support and contributing money and arms and actually joining street gangs in an attempt to overthrow incumbent governments is when those people are enormously unhappy over their domestic situation. Food wars, you can call it, but that's what became extant in Germany prior to World War II. If you go back and read how narrow a thing it was for Hitler to come into power, and how many occasions there were when it could have gone the other way, when he sent those troops across that one bridge toward Aachen and into the Rhineland, he could have been stopped by a few companies of the French army, which was much larger than the German army by, I think, an order of 5 to 1 at the time. And Hitler actually told the commander of those troops who marched in there with the flowers and the muzzles of their guns, with the German bands playing and so on, when he just did it because it was a political move. He felt that he had read the temperament of Neville Chamberlain. He had read the temperament of the aged, old, doddering people who were over the French government and the architects of the Treaty of Versailles, and he was going to rub their face in it and dare them to do anything. But he ordered the commander, if you meet any resistance whatsoever, you just turn around and march right back across that bridge into Germany proper, and we'll do it some other way. You can read that in history. He did. He gave those orders. But he got away with it, and they let him get away with it. And it was such a near thing. So don't try to pick some guy out of the masses over there now like Franz Schönhuber, whose father was an SS sergeant and who was making a lot of hay. I haven't heard about him lately, but probably if I could read the German press, I would have been hearing about him, who was really beginning to get quite a following when the wall came down among young people in East Germany, because he is an ultra-right-wing, ultra-nationalist, and what does he say? Nothing different from what Buchanan said. If Buchanan had been successful and gotten the party's nomination and managed to kick Bush out and had gotten elected, we would have been at war with Germany and Japan in less than 2 years. We would have had protectionism. What was Buchanan saying? America first. That was the slogan of the American-German Bunds who were meeting in places all over the United States. There was a large group of them up in Santa Barbara, California, or somewhere in there, to whom Herman Hayes' father was a devout devotee. He used to go down there and stand there with a swastika armband, salute the swastika flag. There were pictures of Hitler, and we're talking here 1941. Little Herman grew up in a Nazi family. His father was a member of the German-American Bund, B-U-N-D, meaning what? Organization or clique or group or whatever. It doesn't say anything evil about Herman, or that Herman is necessarily a Nazi. I don't think that of Herman Hay at all. Now, let's just philosophize a little bit here and ask some questions together if we can. Since Jesus said, and that one pivotal prophecy does not require us to know the identity of Israel at all, it just focuses in on Palestine. When you see the abomination of desolation stand in the holy place where it ought not, then, and it comes together with armies around Jerusalem, we got to ask some questions. What is the abomination of desolation? We think we know. You can go to Hastings Bible Dictionary and all the other books and look up what is the abomination of desolation. We can see that there were 7 desecrations of the temple in all, including the one by Antiochus Epiphanes, the slaughtering swine in the temple, including the one of the Romans during the time of the sack of Jerusalem in 71 AD, when all of the Jews regarded the Roman standards, and those standards were not merely a decorative thing that had the horns and the tassels and a banner and the various symbolism of the fascist, this gathering of reeds that is bound together with the hatchet in the top of it that became the symbol of Benito Mussolini's fascist Italy. But you've seen the German marching bands during the days in your documentaries you viewed during the days of Hitler. And those are identical right out of the old Roman standards. They look the same. Of course, they have the swastikas there, so do the Romans. And so do the ancient Hittites. So the swastika is a very ancient signal or sign, a symbol rather, that goes back a long way. But they would plant those in the soil, and then the Roman soldiers would kneel before them, and they would sacrifice to them, and they would offer to them. It was not just a symbol of a marching band, it was an idol. And if you look at some of the histories, you will find that the Jewish people reacted very violently against it, and it brought about a terrible pogrom of a genocidal policy of killing and wiping out hundreds of thousands of Jews. Josephus is quite graphic. It hurts me to even describe people being impaled, so I won't describe it, just use the term, that's the end of that. But their bodies then, while they still writhed in agony, smeared with bitumen and set afire. And Josephus wrote that there were so many people in forests of these pails that had been put upright and set afire and thus killed, that it lit the city at night. Now, we've got to take the prophecies seriously, because if I read Matthew 24 correctly, and I think I do, it is a dual prophecy, and there is yet to come another destruction of the city of Jerusalem, but not the city of Jerusalem as it is today, because today there is no temple of God that is there. It says the holy place. The holy place cannot mean just Jerusalem. Why? Somebody think of one right quick. 11th chapter of Revelation, that great city called Sodom and Egypt, wherein our Lord was crucified. So today, in the prophetic present, God does not view Jerusalem, no matter what, some of these American evangelists might say who go over to, quote, the Holy Land or the holy city. He doesn't view it as a holy city. I have thought, this is merely speculation, that if they succeed in discovering an old cornerstone and they erect a temporary building, even a temporary tabernacle or a tent or something, or if they themselves lay a cornerstone and dedicate it and begin offering sacrifices, that might satisfy that biblical prophecy. I don't know about that. That's just speculation. When we went over there and interviewed Gershon Solomon last year, he was the one who actually brought about the Intifada, and indirectly has cost an awful lot of lives. That's the Palestinian uprising, and they've been in that state of uprising. And when you go now to East Jerusalem, you've got to go through long cordons of armored cars and small tanks and Israeli police and army elements and so on to go back and forth from the Arab part over in the eastern part toward Ramallah and toward Bethlehem. When I visited the mayor of Bethlehem and interviewed him for a television program, we had to go through a lot of police checks on the way because of the Intifada. Well, the uprising or the Intifada came about as a result of Gershon Solomon and his Temple of the Mount, or Temple Mount Faithful, or Faithful of the Temple Mount. I forget how he calls their organization. Having been given some kind of a guarantee by somebody somewhere down in the Israeli Jerusalem police force that he could get away with it and they would be protected. Well, they weren't protected, but they made their march, and they were going to lay a symbolic cornerstone of the third temple. Now, obviously, nothing happens over there in secret, and the young Palestinians all got word of it, and they gathered en masse up there by the mosque above the Wailing Wall and near that north wall where our big dig and our excavations went on for many, many years. I don't know, does anybody know, is Ambassador still involved in that dig? I haven't heard a word about it for years. I just don't know. Nobody knows. Maybe they got out of that after my father was no longer there to keep supporting it or keep forking the money over. But they wanted to lay a symbolic cornerstone, and so these young Palestinians began chucking rocks from as far as they could throw them, and a bunch of people got killed, and the Israeli overreacted, and began shooting them. And when I was over there visiting the Palestinian leadership, the very same people that you saw with Jim Baker were the people that I interviewed. I was in their home. And Husseini and some of the others who came over here to the United Nations meeting and who have been involved in the peace conferences both in Madrid and in Geneva are the same people that I was talking to over there. And they're just so bitter. He had a picture on his wall we took a picture of that showed all of these 17 bodies with blood dripping down, and it had Arabic figures, but there were something like 17 young men, most of whom they pointed out to me were shot in the back as an overreaction of the police against that huge riot of these young Palestinians trying to kill Gershon Solomon and his Temple of the Faithful, Temple of the Mount Faithful, trying to lay that symbolic cornerstone. Now, these are big events. I mean, this thing that has torn that whole Middle East apart all of this time, the Intifada, the uprising from the Gaza Strip to the Golan Heights to the West Bank, is a big thing, not just a little thing. And it's still ongoing today. That's why, of course, the United States has tried to, as the UN has, to get these people together to sit down, to agree to talk, at least, and to begin to try to solve a problem. What would cause the building of a third temple? With that stormy reaction, remembering what happened when a guy that now thinks he's a member of the Church of God International, maybe he is, I don't know, but Rohan apparently attends some of our services down in Australia. But Rohan went over there and threw a bomb and tried to firebomb the Al-Aqsa Mosque back in, I think, the early 70s or late 1960s. It was world news. They arrested him, and he had a Plain Truth magazine in his pocket. So, of course, I had to write a letter of absolute, disclaimer that, well, sure, I said we'd send a letter, we'd send a copy of the Plain Truth to Satan the Devil if we knew his address. That doesn't bother me at all. You know, I mean, Adolf Hitler, if he were alive today, could be on our mailing list if he wants to read something that's good for him. But because the guy had a Plain Truth magazine doesn't mean we agree with what he did. Any more than every time somebody pulls off a murder, you find out that he used to attend the Baptist church. So we were able to dodge all of that notoriety okay. But Rohan tried to pave the way for the building of the temple. Now, I don't know the answer to the question, does the temple have to be built right where it used to be to satisfy the demands of that prophecy? I don't think so. But the people over there think so. They want to build it right along the foundation that they have found out there of where that old temple used to be. But before they can do that, they've got the Dome of the Rock and the Al-Aqsa Mosque standing in their way. In order to destroy those, you've got all these gigantic Islamic nations, many of whom are arming themselves with rather sophisticated weaponry, Syria being right now the most heavily armed, and because of Saddam Hussein being turned into a temporary choir boy, we've got Syria importing silkworms and scuds of the more super sophisticated variety, and of course has, I think, both chemical and biological capability. I doubt very much that he's got nuclear capability, but the Israeli intelligence services, the Mossad, are very, very keenly keeping their eye on Assad of Syria and very concerned about what he's doing. And they're very concerned about the potential of a sudden sneak attack of a massive Scud attack on Israel, which could release poison gases and so on and begin to gas Jews. So let's speculate for a minute. Two things I've speculated about that might bring about a massive religious revival, because that's what it would take, of Israel before that could ever occur. Now, prophecy seems to strongly state that it is only at the time of the discontinuation or the interruption of the daily sacrifice when the tribulation begins. And it is only when, quote, he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people when the tribulation begins. And it is only when you see Jerusalem encompassed with armies and at the same time the abomination standing in the holy place where it ought not, that the tribulation begins. So there is no more organized preaching at a work, and God's church is put down and out by some sort of civil authority somehow at about this same time. Is it the Roman Catholic Church? I've suspected so. Is it the Roman Catholic Church behind the scenes calling the shots and influencing the civil government? That's possible. There's another possibility. There is no more civil government. The nation's infrastructure has simply come unraveled, and there are only regional, local, and neighborhood gangs roaming around, just like today over there in Somalia. There are probably 24 different gangs running around with arms, fighting one another in this frenzied death dance of a nation that is in the throes of an incredible drought and a famine, with hundreds of thousands, perhaps more than 1 million, dying over there, and emergency relief coming in from the United States. There was a West German plane, or a German plane there the other day I saw. The tail had the Iron Cross on it, and the big pallets of wheat and so on. You've got armed guards standing there trying to keep these people from grabbing it and taking it out and selling it to people. So you have a nation there that has absolutely come apart and has drifted into complete anarchy, the way Spain did just at the time of the Spanish Civil War, and the way Germany did in 1935 and 36, before Hitler became chancellor. Is that going to happen in the United States? The Bible seems to imply very strongly that the trumpet shall sound, to sound an alarm for war, but no man shall answer. I always used to say, and we felt that that meant back in the 50s, that the great strength of the United States in terms of our Army, Navy, and Marine Corps would somehow dwindle so that we would become like a third or fourth class power, and then because of massive onslaught of natural calamities, drought, famine, and disease epidemics, we would be so weak by that time, and epidemics could go through all your personnel, including the National Guard and the State Guard and the barracks of our Marine and Army and Navy and so on, so that what it says, that the trumpet will sound to war, but no man shall answer, it implies to me they would be so weak or so sick or so unable that they simply would not be able to mobilize against an attack from without. Now, what would bring about? The two things I speculated about. One is the discovery of the Ark of the Covenant. and the other would be a massive attack which would bring about enormous loss of life in Israel. Either one of those two things, I think, might do it. How do you feel about that? I talked one time, a long time ago, in my office, just speculating, what if in the dig there, someday, we, of course we were still involved at that time, should be digging way down here, and we've already gotten to the Herodian level, and we're picking up coins and shards, and I've got a perfect little shaped olive oil vessel on my office, on my wall, given to me by Professor Mazar, that was on somebody's little kitchen niche when Jesus walked by outside. Treasure it very highly. It is from the Herodian period in Jerusalem, and I have it in my office given to me by Professor Mazar, and it is absolutely intact. It's in perfect shape, just a little clay jug that contained oil. And of course they used to hollow out a little niche for them to fit. They didn't put a flat bottom on them. That's kind of interesting the way they made them. And they had a little stand of three little legs made out of metal, and they put them on that stand. I don't know why they did that, but there must have been some reason having to do with the way the fluids percolated in them and having to have the bottom, the air circulate around it rather than be against something that would be damp, I guess, to preserve them. But be that as it may. At that time, I was wondering whether or not we might accidentally discover some subterranean cavern down there, because somebody refresh my memory, in whose kingly reign was it? It was prior to the removal from the land that the Ark of the Covenant disappears from our view in history. I've got to go back and look at that. Ted, do you remember?
Right after Josiah.
Was it following Josiah's restoration that the Ark of the Covenant is never mentioned again? I could prove that by just looking real quickly at the exhaustive concordance and find the Ark and find where's the last place in the Old Testament it's ever mentioned, but it's been years since I've done that. You may be right. But it's long before Judah was taken captive in 540 B.C., I think, or a significant time before. The Ark, however, disappears and is no longer seen in history. Where did it go? Now, somebody gave me an interesting publication, John Garner did the other day, that is a fascinating thing about some copper scrolls that were found, I guess, along in the same area and about the same time as some of the Dead Sea Scrolls, and for many, many years have been, well, it's a lengthy article dealing with how delicate they are, how they had to saw them, straighten them out, look at them, get the light just correct. The research has been going on, but allegedly they are copper scrolls that are right now in a museum in Amman, Jordan, that detail all kinds of buried treasure and talk about the amounts in talents here and there and give locations about ancient locations and buildings and how it's in a well below an alcove just to the right of the door of the entry of this and that building. And it's all there in that copper scroll. So it's a fascinating thing, and I want to maybe we can do a book report on it or something. People are interested by buried treasure. And this is a copper scroll. We don't know if it's spurious or not. It was hidden and concealed there centuries ago, and allegedly knows where a lot of gold and silver are buried all over the Middle East. Somewhere that ark exists, as I was saying. I don't know if God took it up to heaven, and there it is, floating around up there the other side of the Milky Way someplace. I tend to think it is somewhere on this earth, just like I know Noah's Ark is up there, if we can ever find it and ever get, the thing revealed, which it will be, I believe, by the time of the beginning of the millennium, and maybe before that time. If somebody could discover that ark, what would its meaning be to the Jewish people of today, who are basically non-religious? Just think of that stone pot with original manna in it. The rod that Aaron used to throw down before the Pharaoh and to tap the river and turn it to blood. The original 10 Commandments, the original scrolls of the Torah that were kept in the side of the ark, the mercy seat, the golden cherubim. It would be unbelievable. It would be such a priceless national treasure, but not only that, I think it would bring about an incredible religious revival, and that immediately a lot of comparatively irreligious Jews would get converted to Judaism and join up with one of these sects of the ultra-Orthodox people there, and you would find a wave of ultra right-wing Jewish religious fervor That could bring about, to me, the building of a temple almost immediately. They say, we got to hurry now. Look back here in the Old Testament what it says. There's no house to... Here, what about David, coming back from the Philistines, Kirjath-Jearim, and he wanted to bring the ark back to Jerusalem. You can imagine the movement that would begin immediately. The government would provide funds. And that might trigger the destruction of those mosques. And the Israelis would just simply say, if it's war, it's war. Who knows? The Israelis could actually even have an interdictory strike and could actually bomb some of those cities before they think these people are getting ready to hit them. You and I don't know how that's going to happen. I don't have the faintest idea. All I can do is speculate. But how does there get to be a holy place for the abomination of desolation to move into it, and how does there get to be a series of sacrifices that now have to cease? We've got to go back and see how that might occur. It might occur as a result of massive loss of life, of the maybe 50, 60, 70% destruction of the population of the Israelitish nation of Israel, which would cause the remnants of them to have this fantastic religious revival and try to build a temple and go back to sacrificing and ordain a priesthood. Are we all aware, have we read articles in Time magazine and other national magazines of some repute? Now, we're not talking about little bitty tracts handed out by evangelists on street corners, about the red calf and about the temple vestments and about all of the brazen pots and vessels. And there are organizations in Israel, in Jerusalem, that have gone back and carefully researched this and have constructed these things. And the vestments of the priesthood are there, and the breastplate and the Urim and the Thummim are there, and they're getting all the trappings and the accoutrements of a Levitical priestly temple service prepared. There are organizations in the United States. I read quite an article about one man. He is quite elderly, I think maybe as old as 84 or 5. Vance, do you remember? But and I forget his name. But they, in that particular Jewish sect, believe he is the Messiah. Remember who I'm talking about? I don't. Who is that? John, go ahead. What's his name? I can't quite, I got the Menachem part. Shearson? Schneerson. Menachem Schneerson. New York City. And there are a group of people in the United States, as well as in Israel, who believe he is the Messiah. The last word I heard was that they were building him a beautiful home. It's already been done. Not in Jerusalem, but down somewhere near Lod or Tel Aviv. And are begging him to come there in some huge, big, symbolic move from New York to Israel. Did you read the same thing I did? Okay, so that's something to crank into your thought, that is happening, that these people are getting these things ready for a temple service. So as I look at all of this, I see that there are many things that have to fall into place before these prophecies can take place. And I think we're right on the brink of some of the major events falling into place. Germany is starting to tear at itself in a brand new neo-Nazi frenzy. Now, the government is reacting, of course, as we would expect it to. Totally against all of this and in far more moderate and democratic fashion. And I think so far the majority of the people are against what these neo-Nazi hotheads are doing, but I think all of us would be dumbfounded if we knew the large percentage who agree with them. They may not agree with their methods, but the larger percentage of people. One statistic I had given to me in a clipping that was sent in the mail about 2 or 3 months ago was that a leading German newspaper had taken a poll, and 54% of the people they polled favored a king or an autocrat, a powerful leader over the Bundesrat and the Bundestag and a prime minister. 54% of people surveyed in Germany wanted a strong leader again to lead their nation. And I found that rather chilling, to think that is where those people are right now today. So let me pass on to you a little interesting tidbit we were discussing here with some of you fellows over our dinner night before last or whenever it was, that many years ago when I was speculating in my office with Bob Kuhn about the possibility of our people in the Big Dig discovering the Ark and what that would mean. Little did I know that old Bob decided that he got him a brilliant idea, and he went and talked to Stan Rader. Well, for the next X number of months, I knew that Bob was working very late at night, but I didn't have any idea what he was working on, and he is a hard worker, believe me. He's probably by now a multimillionaire. And he took over his father's company and merged it with other companies, and he's written probably 5 or 6 technical books since that time. He has lectured in places like Harvard. He takes several trips a year to Japan. He has paid huge consultancy fees to effect gigantic corporate mergers. I mean, we're talking about a Jewish guy who happens to be extremely intelligent and fantastically gifted, but unfortunately, because of certain other affinities and his friendship with Stan Rader and what all happened when I was ousted and a little bit here and there of things that were questionable from my standpoint, Bob Kuhn is not with the CGI or the WCG. He's doing his own thing. And one thing he is doing is making money. He and Rader wrote a book. They were close friends with Steven Spielberg. And either A, Rader and Kuhn showed Spielberg the manuscript, or B, they sat around and talked freely about their project. I think that the reason Spielberg chose the term Raiders of the Lost Ark is because Rader, R-A-D-E-R's name, was on the manuscript that he read. In any event, there was a massive lawsuit, and it dragged on for like 9 or 10 years. And I have heard from David Andian that there was an undisclosed, wink wink, cash settlement out of court. Spielberg did pay off. That's kind of interesting to me, because that whole movie came from a conversation in my office in Pasadena, California in the early 1970s with Bob Kuhn. It's just the way things happen sometimes. I'm speculating what would happen if they found the lost ark. Bob starts writing the book together with Stan Rader. Spielberg sees it, makes this gigantically successful box office, movie, makes, I don't know, what kind of a ton of millions of dollars they made. They probably could have paid Kuhn and Rader $1 million or $2 million apiece easily, and they would have been tickled to death to get it, and Spielberg wouldn't have missed it, I imagine. But I just, in passing, to toy with a little bit. Now, have I, to this point, created any observations or contributions with regard to these scenarios we're talking about in the Middle East and about prophecy? Ted Phillips.
Second Maccabees talks about the tradition that Jeremiah took the Ark of the Covenant along with the tent of meeting up in the mountain forest or wherever it was and hid it. Nobody knows where it is. Why would it have to be a temple if they have the tent of meeting? What's happening?
True, and they could construct something where it is in situ, in its location where they find it, couldn't they? I mean, I don't know. I'm very, very, flexible on what might satisfy that prophecy. A cornerstone, a tent over it, any kind of a dedication ceremony could satisfy a holy place. It doesn't have to be the Holy of Holies in a completely gleaming, finished third temple. David. Sorry, the sign of what? Sign and seal. A book called Sign of Seal, saying this for the tape to repeat it, by a British author named Hancock who claims to have found the lost ark. It is in Ethiopia. Why do I doubt that? Right. Someone else had a book where they claimed they'd found the lost ark. It's not just one person. There have been umpteen people have found the Noah's Ark, and a lot of people have found the lost Ark of the Covenant. Yes, Les. Why didn't he lift the lid and taste of the manna? See if, just kidding. Yeah. That's fascinating. So, now, everything that we're talking about may not happen. I mean, it may not be required that there's a massive onslaught against Israel and massive loss of life, and it may not be required that the ark, we're not trying to say something dogmatic here to say, it's got to happen this way. I'm just wondering what brings to pass a holy place that qualifies as a holy place into which the abomination of desolation will be set up. Tom?
Why wouldn't it be, just an idea, why wouldn't, to suppress the Jews, why wouldn't, since the Roman Empire was so great in that area, why wouldn't it be in the Vatican?
Well, you'd think they would have displayed it if it were in the Vatican. I don't know the answer to that perfectly, of course. Yeah, they claim Peter's bones are down there, and I doubt that very much, but they're a pretty secret organization. One never knows.
Zola
Yeah.
Levitt has interviewed the artisans in Jerusalem that are actually making the implements in the temple and has shown those on the cover.
Who is Zola Levitt?
He's a Jewish Christian.
A Jewish Christian. That's a strange name, Zola. Levitt means he's a Levite, doesn't it? Zola Levitt. Huh. And he is a Jewish Christian?
He goes to Israel all the time.
Okay, he's not a member of the CGI then. You're not talking about CGI.
He keeps Christmas and Easter.
Oh, he keeps Christmas and Easter.
But he teaches about these other also.
Oy vey, then he's not the Jew anymore.
He's interviewed these people making the implements for the temple.
Right.
Shown the vestures and candelabras.
Yeah. Well, I don't know just how close we are to some of these great events where it talks about entering into the glorious land, but I've certainly painted this scenario oftentimes in articles where I can't see any nation that it would have more to gain than Germany coming to the rescue of Israel with a multilateral European force to go in there, just like the UN is trying to set up to go in right now and just to shying back from it because of the mountainous terrain to keep these people from killing each other in Sarajevo and Yugoslavia. And that eventually something else might happen like that, and it won't be like Desert Storm of the United Nations in charge this time, United States, it'll be under the UN or maybe some other like the European defense community has gotten together with basically large contributions from some of the Scandinavian countries, predominantly Germany and France. And they have a separate defense pact of their own, by the way, outside of the aegis of NATO already. So the Germans were pretty chagrined that they didn't take part, but their constitution precludes that. In Desert Storm, they sent those 2 minesweepers over to the eastern end of the Mediterranean, and they did contribute some money and so on. But I had predicted then, and I'm seeing right now in the Japanese Diet, a fight to change the Constitution. And I believe that there is already argument underfoot in Germany to change the Constitution, to allow these nations to assume the role of world policeman under the aegis of the UN, commensurate with their economic power, their economic clout. And that's a logical argument these people are putting forth. And the thing is, James Baker and our administration in the White House are urging them to do so. We were very chagrined because the Germans weren't able to send troops down there to help out. So before too long, we're going to see Germany flexing its international muscles in a way that we wish we weren't. Well, I just wanted to touch on that briefly, and I also wanted to ask how it's going to affect us as a church. I can't give you any perfect answer on that. I don't know how many years we have left to do the work that God has given us to do and what the persecutions are going to be. I have not backed off one whit in saying things that I do about the potential of the Pope moving over there to Jerusalem. I had some people just get in my face and just scoff at me and just, oh my, when I said that, a couple of them turned around and just walked out. Up in Flint, I think it was, I was talking to a group of people that came to me after the campaign, and they were asking some questions about prophecy and what did I think, who was the false prophet, and I said the Pope at Rome, made them furious. And I've had letters from Catholics. I got a letter from a Catholic lady down in Houston who really was angry. Didn't quite threaten to kill me, but indicated that if it could be done, she would be standing there applauding. She would like to see it done. And I have said a few times to people in campaigns that one of these days I'm going to get myself killed saying these things, but that's okay. I probably won't mind once the job is accomplished. But I'm going to keep on saying it anyway because that's what I think is going to occur. All right, well, we have come to 12 o'clock, conclusion time. In parting, let me say we have really appreciated all of you men and women and wives that came along going to the time and the effort and the expense to give up your holiday and come down here and share it with us in this ministerial conference. I hope all of you have gotten a great deal out of it, that you've been encouraged and inspired, and your lives have been enriched, and you've hopefully gotten some additional knowledge. Hope you're going back to your local church areas with some new ideas, some new programs you want to put in, new organization, and to make your local church better. Please give us your input. If there's any way we can improve here. We recognize, and I've had cause to come face to face with that and understand that we need to recognize a real need for us to communicate better with you, more often with you. Charlie is doing the best job he can on the telephone. We have the bulletin. It isn't as often or as frequent as it ought to be. We understand that. As I told you, we're going to try to crank up the international news and put the two of them together in tabloid form. We'll be talking and deliberating about that in the next few weeks. So please make that a two-way street, and you pick up the phone and call in here and write to us and let us know what your needs are. And again, I want to thank all of you personally and tell you that you're my brothers and sisters, and I love every one of you. Appreciate very deeply what you do for the church. You do it voluntarily. My signature's not on your paycheck. And a lot of you people are out there taking your own time and working yourself sometimes to where you can't sleep at night, and it's very, very deeply appreciated. Thank you all. May God richly bless you all, protect you on the way home.